Our final speaker of today is our keynote speaker and design legend, Neville Brody. Neville runs his own agency, Brody Associates, from his London studio, working worldwide with clients such as Coca-Cola, BBC, Sony Music, Channel 4, Christian Dior, Supreme, The Times, and Shiseido. Apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly. Previously president of D&AD, he is Professor of Communication at the Royal College of Art and Royal Designer for Industry. Brody leads his practice with experimentation, exploration and discovery through influential projects such as Fuse and the ADF. He has always been focused on education and how it can change to better support creative development and opportunity. In 2023, Brody's hotly awaited new publication, The Graphic Language of Neville Brody 3, NB3, was launched in partnership with Thames and Hudson. NB3 is a monumental collection of Brody's work produced over the last 30 years. So we are hugely excited to have Neville here today, and so many people have said how influential he was for their work in the 80s of people I've worked with and just continue to do so up today. So it's been brilliant having all of you fantastic here today and to end on a high with Neville. So we will hopefully have a few minutes at the end of Neville's talk for audience questions and Zoom questions as well if you have them, so please do put them in the chat. And I'll come around with a microphone as I have been doing. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Neville Brody.
Oh my God. Becky, no pressure there. And when you said influential in the 80s, does that mean how old they are? Or?
Yes, it was how old they are.
Excellent. What am I pressing?
Forward and back or the slide. Okay, yeah,
Oh,
there you
okay.
go.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that we have the kind of lighting is a bit
Much.
it's a bit much.
Get used to it, promise.
I'm a little bit dazed. I landed this morning, or this lunchtime actually, back from Düsseldorf. I was doing a talk there. So I'm feeling a little bit still on the plane somehow. But I'm just going to talk you through like a bunch of stuff I put together. And hopefully this all makes sense. And what's quite interesting, Bob, was the fact that when I went to study at the London College of Printing, of course the London College of Printing started here. So it's a full circle kind of thing. And 1922, you're a box of facts, Bob. It's doing some weird things. So we had to transfer all of these files from Keynote to PowerPoint, as we all know. I think we're going to club together to buy you a little Mac up here. So if anyone has one they're not using right now. So typographism. Typographism really is a word that we've been using to describe things that go beyond typography, beyond graphics, and it's something that kind of defines us as practicing graphic designers. And it's that space that it's not really commercial necessarily, and it's not strict typography. It's somewhere in the middle that's highly exploratory. So this piece was designed when I was at London College of Printing. This is one of my student pieces, and this is from 1978. And just thinking about how such a small amount of things have really changed over the decades. And I was imagining here how maybe El Lazitsky or Rodchenko, what would they be doing without technology? And it pushed me to something that Bob was talking about a lot, which is how our cultures and the way we practice has been really impacted by changes in technology. So one of the big influences on me, of course, was Dadaism and constructivism. And Dadaism happened a lot because of the advent of halftone photography in printing. So you could bring images in, and then you had far greater access to letterpress and other forms of printing, like woodblock. And all of these things came together with a wider distribution of print. And And Dada kind of pulled all of that together. And before then, we'd had painting, which had been incredibly impacted by the advent of the camera. So the camera then kind of removed the responsibility of painters to capture reality and fantasy and religion. And it allowed then those painters to explore other things about how our existence on this planet might look when you start to analyze and think about it. So very swiftly from the invention of the camera, you end up with Impressionism, and then you move to Cubism, and eventually to abstract Expressionism. So all of this is made possible by technology, and the same happened at the beginning of the 20th century, and then you have Vorticism and Cubism that celebrates all of that, and then the Bauhaus emerges from that, which is a new celebration of technology and industry and manufacturing, all the way up to what we now know as the personal computer, or the laptop, or the PC as it's known here. Oh, sorry, I'm a little bit miffed because Spurs lost this afternoon, and I don't really want to talk about it. God, it's our familiar collapse. But anyway, I'll get over my depression in a minute. So all the things we do is driven by changes through technology. The PC changed everything for us, but actually we were doing a lot of stuff before then. So this is a mix of screen printing, Letraset, litho, all together. And this is another piece I did when I was at college. This is now 45 years old, this piece. A set like this, and then hugely impacted by the photocopier. And the photocopier allowed us then to experiment. Fax machines came after that. It allowed us to distribute this stuff. And we made fanzines, and those fanzines were printed using photocopiers and stapling and selling to friends at clubs and in shops. So technology drives how we see each other and how we share information constantly, and that's a very familiar story here at St. Bride Foundation. So a lot of experimentation, trying to step outside of the remit of regular patterns and codes and commercial limitations, and always, and I've lost. Oh, I can really shout.
We've got backup, it's all good. Oh, yeah, they get a bit temperamental at the end of the day. Should work.
Are we back?
Yeah.
Excellent. What was I saying? Can you come up and repeat it, Beck? No. So part of what we were trying to do in these days was challenge convention, because convention kind of makes us sleepwalk through commercial imperatives that we're not necessarily aware of, and political imperatives as well. So embracing the thing that makes something break is something that we've put at the heart of our practice. Because when something breaks, something new happens. And something breaks down, something new can emerge from that. So always pushing the experimental, always pushing the fact that nothing is fixed. And media and advertising love fixed formats. So the only way to move around that is to keep unfixing your format. And embrace fluidity, embrace ambiguity. And it's led to us putting a kind of a poetic approach to visual communication at the heart of what we did. Because in poetry, you're creating a dialogue of interpretation. It's not a fixed message. It's not a monologue. It's a dialogue, which advertising really doesn't like. And then working by hand is something that, again, I love about this place. It's such a hand-built, focused environment. Everything is tactile, no matter what, and that translates to the physical print. And it's quite interesting then to see that then become digitized, and we're looking at it on screen, so then it has another life again. So making molds of my hands, manipulating them and ending up in this sort of space. We were doing a lot of record covers then, and sadly this is something that has kind of disappeared largely. We do have vinyl, of course, and we have 12 inches But we've sort of forgotten the fact that these were canvases for exploration and experimentation. And if we didn't have these at that time, I wouldn't have had a vehicle to publish work on. And I wouldn't have been able to survive financially. We were living in a squat in Covent Garden at the time. And the record industry, bedroom industry, was what kept us going. This is made for, it was a clothes shop in Ealing, and here it's using, again it's pre-digital, it's using coat hangers to form objects. And everything we did was by hand. This is a typeface, that's typeface 6, which I developed for the Face magazine. This is early 80s, and we would have to draw everything by hand, clean it up with Tipex or a scraper or a scalpel. It was often badly drawn. You couldn't twist stuff easily, and we ended up photocopying all of them, waxing them on the back, cutting each letter out individually, and then, this is me, I'm afraid, sticking them onto boards. And sometimes we had to draw each headline by hand because the font didn't exist. And there was a bike messenger waiting at the door to take it to the printer, and you're still only on D of the alphabet. So everything was tactile, everything was hands-on. You could rapidly change things. That was kind of the beauty of what we were doing. And, you know, the Face magazine, the whole issue was done in about 4 or 5 days. So it was all night working. But the fact that it was physical meant that we could shift stuff around. We could cut stuff up. We could use sandpaper. We could scrape stuff in. This is some work I did for the redesign of Mademoiselle magazine in New York in the late 80s. And we did it all. We did the whole magazine, and Alexander Lieberman, the great editorial director of Condé Nast, came back from holiday, saw this, and we explained what it was, and he said, "It's so pretentious designing your own typeface," and put the dummy straight in the trash. Post, so branding, all the stuff done by hand, and then this was early 80s, and we didn't know digital was coming. But somehow this feels kind of quite proto-digital in a way. So all the stuff that was going on just before digital became the digital aesthetic. And again, we've sort of forgotten that. And this is 1988, this is 35 years ago now, when digital first landed on our desks. I never know what's next. And then, again, I can go back on PowerPoint. Ooh, it's not so bad then. In the studio, we've kind of embraced the digital thing in the sense that we try to make it as fluid and imprecise as possible. Coming back to the idea that definition and new possibilities happen at the edge of something. So we deliberately leave our work as ambiguous as possible, and it's how people interpret that then becomes the meaning. So we don't impose meaning necessarily on everything we do. We try and leave it as open, as interpretable, as feasible. And often looking at the shapes, because when we think about typography, it's not only the words you're saying, but the way you shape those words gives you the cue as to how to understand those words. So the emotional response often comes from the shape of the lettering itself. And one phrase set in Times New Roman, thanks Bob, as opposed to Bedoni or as opposed to Arial, they will give you different messages. So before you've read a single word, the choice of that typeface will impact the way you're going to read that message. And then those two things set off against each other and give you the landed meaning. So we try and push that sculptural capability as far as we can. We try and explore, again, ambiguity in legibility in order to figure out what those other shapes can bring. So like here, I mean, that's an @ symbol, but trying to create something a little more totemic. And here, this is +81, and we realized that if you turned the +81 logo sideways, you ended up with a face. And sometimes design isn't about adding something, it might be just about a twist, a small change. And here, this is, I think, probably 10, 15 years ago, we were pushing 3D software as far as we could, and it kept breaking. And it's, again, the point where it was breaking was where we wanted to start understanding what new possibilities came out of that. And understanding then how to repeat that breaking became a way of working for us, and led to calendar pages. It led to the cover of the V&A magazine celebrating postmodernism. I'm here thinking about the facade of postmodernism, advertising for Issey Miyake in New York. So where the accident comes, it's something then that we can embrace again. So I believe in practice being about absorbing the risk and placing risk and exploration at the center of what you do, rather than the thing you try and avoid. And actually it's those mutations that allow us as living beings to keep moving is something at the basis of nature and natural selection. But as soon as something becomes fixed, it stops becoming alive. And this is the inside back spread of the new book. This piece grew out of that, which is where that process starts to break down again. And this ended up on a wall about that size in a salon in Japan. And led us to thinking about fluidity. So again, this is a few years ago, we created coding that created these fluid forms by inputting a certain amount of data and commands. And thinking again about digital as something that I've said before isn't fixed. You know, so why are we employing fixed forms in data? It should all be very fluid and open and scalable. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. How am I doing for time? Oh, I have a 17:23.
20 minutes. Oh yeah.
Okay, it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be. This is falling off.
Yes.
Excellent.
Oh, yeah, it has. Okay. Oh, we're back. It's all good.
Okay. And this was produced for a poster that went with my second book. This is 1994. Again, looking at this stuff fresh for me, felt like more experimental stuff and radical stuff was happening then, at the beginning of digital, than is happening now. And the technology has evolved incredibly, but what we can do with it has shrunk. And it's become very limited and very generic. And we're living in environments that are very hygienic and cleansed, and we have these little windows that we can perform in. But it's in an office block. It looks like looking at an office building or a prison. And all you can do is, you know, put different curtains up or put a poster in the window or do a performance. But what print allowed us to do was experiment with the way you present the content and the information. So you shift from word and image and layout to now it's image and word. And that's it. So word supports the image is the icon, whereas previously the image was supporting what the words would communicate, and the layout would help. This is very early. This is using a dot matrix printer in the studio, the first time we were able to start printing stuff out. And again, trying to push it to something a little more surreal. 92, 30 years ago. I'm going to stop saying how many years ago this all is. This was the first thing we got printed in Japan. We sent it directly, and it was an A4 file, and it took all night, and we had to separate it into an R, a G, and a B, and they would recompile that in Japan and enlarge it back up to A1. And we thought that was amazing, and it cost about £2,000 a modem charges. But But we thought that was like unbelievable, and now you could send this in like 15 seconds. And a piece more recently where we're still trying to think about how we can push digital into physical, or rather blend those edges, because it's so vital for us as beings. Something that I was actually in Düsseldorf last night. If you manage to be in Germany, there's an amazing show on postmodernism there that's not long opened. Nigel Coates was the architect on it, and we developed this font. We did the original branding for them, and we developed this font which had a more postmodern slant on it, and the original font was called Bon, and we called this Bonster. And play, I think digital can be incredibly playful. Right now it's quite corporate and industrial, and then we've repurposed this again for a poster for Parker in Japan. And typography. So I've tried to think a lot more about typography on this. And a few years ago, to celebrate 40 years of the birth of punk, we were asked by the mayor's office to look at a way of connecting all of the different activities that were happening around punk. There was concerts, there was exhibitions, there was social community events, and we came up with the punk dot. So we had punk dot London, we had punk dot Liverpool, we had punk dot Manchester. So trying to find a language which is shared across everything. Because recently what's happened is we used to start with expressing a brand. With digital and system building now, that's shifted way back. We start with a period of what we call discovery. Out of that comes a strategy for the brand and the narrative. What is the story the brand is saying? And then we build a system. We're actually starting at the other end. We build a system that leads then to building the components. What components do you use? So we're shifting from not what does a brand look like, but what does a brand say and how does it say it? So that's a really huge shift I've seen in the last 10 years almost. And we finally end up with an expressive piece to show how that whole story might manifest itself. And with Punk London, this was an expression of that. We were developing a fluid system that anyone could use. So we were saying how you could say something. We weren't telling people what they could say. And we developed a typeface that we gave away then to everyone that was involved with the project. So anyone that wanted to do an event that was linked to this could take the font that we created and gave away. And also how images might be treated. So the whole thing then became sort of just a fluid language, defocused. It was decentralized. Great pictures by Derek Ridges, who was also at the talk last night. And he's also a Spurs supporter, so I'm going to call him and commiserate later. Honestly, it's really hard to be up here after the team's lost. And here's how it ended up on the tube. Supreme asked us to create a collection for them that was influenced by the work that was going on in the 80s, and they wanted to use the street and streetwear as a way of continuing that political protest. So it's quite interesting. So today we have traditional protests going on, which is what the government is trying to bank on in order to win the next election by causing a civil war here, as we know. But there are other methods, there are other means, there's other vehicles we can use to get those messages out. Fashion, much of it in luxury, no matter what, is still a vehicle and a transport system. How to get arrested. So print moves to other spaces. It's still all print. Why did LCP change their name to LCC? Because, I mean, we're still printing, but just to different surfaces. Be it on posters, be it banners, be it to screen, be it to the phone. It's still printing for me. But anyway, whatever. And there's two ways we can approach typography itself. One is we can create flamboyant, expressive, entertaining typefaces that sit in fairly regimented environments. Or we can take slightly more normalized typefaces and make expressive use of those. And we've been trying to focus very much on the latter. How do we take normal typefaces, or legible typefaces even, and use them in a way that... Am I aiming at this or this?
Doesn't matter, it should just work in theory. It does.
It worked. And you can do stuff in print that you can't do in digital. This was an article in the Face magazine. It was an interview with Madonna. And the following month, we did an interview with Warhol, and we used the same piece and turned it upside down to reflect the idea of recycling and reusing multiples. And that's something that you can't really do in a digital environment. You could do it in a small window, but you can't actually take over the whole layout. And in 2010, I was asked to come in and design Arena on Plus, and I wanted to start with some visual input that I had. Again, printing. This is 7-inch record labels from Jamaica, and I grew up with reggae in North London. And these 1 or 2 colour labels were incredibly impactful because they had to make a lot of noise just sat on a record shop wall. And we started pulling out influences from these. How can we be expressive? How can we think about a magazine in a different way? Directly being influenced by some of the graphics that were on it, thinking about how images could be melded, and then boiling it down to a component. So we created this font Buffalo, which is deliberately naive, industrial, hand-drawn effectively, and then experimenting with the way that that could start to look. And the process of drilling down in all of this, again an experiment, ended up in this sort of space. So now we're thinking about how can we break up the grid and the column structure as well, and go and see the amazing exhibition by Phil Baines at Central St. Martin's. It's astonishing. Just realizing, Becky was there, realizing the other day just how much we owe Phil Baines. It's just phenomenal. And looking back at my work, especially like here, and thinking about the impact that he had on the way I was thinking. And then we supported it. It was called, the issue was sort of around propaganda, but of course, being a cultural magazine, we called the font Propaganda. And then started using it like this. So again, thinking about how can we create fluid environments for our content? How can we bring the idea of scale, movements, verticality, legibility? And here, especially, this is very Phil Baines-esque. The 2 headline columns aren't wide enough for the words to fit. So then you have a forced turn, which actually says Raf Simons 15 years, but because of putting this William Burroughs style impact device that forces something new to happen, something new happens. And it's following very painterly structures here. So you have the dark suit on the bottom right, echoing the headline on the top left. You have this channel and scale going on between the head, which is kind of turning out. You have things working at different angles to each other. So the whole thing has been very deliberately framed around a painterly model. And again here, where the scale is not where it should be sitting, where you have height above close-up, where normally you would have that as a reversed perspective. Breaking headlines, overlaying, No column grids. We avoided that pretty completely, and having words crash in. Thrillers, a great story by Nick Knight on doormen in tutus, of course. Judy Blame, who passed not too long ago, brilliant stylist, almost invented the idea of fashion styling. And this was the only place we could find in his whole apartment where we had enough room for the photographer to step back. And so coming back to your periscope almost. And here, where white space has been used as a positive force. And the piece is by Paul Morley, and it's about the sense of oppression we all felt in the 80s, especially as youths, especially as young people. But it was a highly oppressive time in the 80s, and the white here is that sense of crush that we felt. And stuff is starting to crush under the weight of that. And then this is John Savage's piece in the same magazine, where the forces that govern are the forces of weight pushing down. So thinking about how layout itself can have meaning. And that's something that we've lost. So do we go back to print, or can we find ways of bringing that thinking into our digital environments? 10 minutes?
A couple more minutes and then some questions, or would you rather just talk on the questions?
I'm just going to talk a bit.
Talk in the
We can
questions.
talk in the pub afterwards.
Absolutely. Yeah, say like 5 to 7, 8 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
10 minutes is fine.
What happens at 1:45?
We have to do a bit of changeover and then we have drinks and pizza.
You have to leave. At what time are we running?
Oh, we're fine. I say
Okay.
you've got 10 minutes, don't worry.
Okay.
No questions, we were running 10 minutes late. You've got 10 minutes.
Okay. Sorry, Becky.
No, don't worry, it's all good.
For the second issue we took the same font propaganda and we cut bits out to the middle to create something that was a bit more sculptural and a bit less legible, but it gave us the ability to play with form in a different way. And we've reverted here to what the London College of Printing would have loved, which is wide-spaced serif capital lettering, centered. So we've brought it back to something that's a bit more classical as a kind of rebirth here. But we're using the shape of the lettering to create something that brings possibility to the page. So here it's the Dream Academy. This is a B. I have no idea why. I'm sure it's content-led. And here, looking at something that feels very classical and sculptural. Thinking about the form and the way form sits in the white space. Here, layout is more an echo that creates a new meaning. And here, again, just thinking about juxtaposition of images, and that's something else we've lost in digital. How do we juxtapose images? How do we create stories out of adjacency? Adjacency has kind of disappeared in digital spaces. You have deliberation, you can put 3 images together in Instagram, and then you look at it on mobile, and it's 2 images, and then so that sort of collapses. So how do we think about adjacency? Is it on walls? Is it a more personal experience? And here, this is the letter S, was being doubled up and just moved down and forming a new shape. And the third one, we took the Tyson typeface that we developed for a Mike Tyson fight in Japan in the 80s. And it was quite sharp, geometric, aggressive. And we created, by moving all the outlines inwards, something that we then called Tyson sensitive. And it was about then looking at, especially as Mike Tyson had gone through all that stuff at that point, is looking at the vulnerability. And then bringing it back in and starting to try and think about how do we use this as a visual poetry? How do we be intentional about the overlapping and interweaving of all of the lettering? Just trying to leave stuff as simple and as pure as possible. And then ironically, of course, there's an interview with a Russian boxer in there, so it allowed us to think about that commentary as something full circle. The New British was a rare single magazine that was produced by an English stylist and illustrator called Kes Glosier. And his vision really was to think about what does reportage editorial mean in our current age. And it's not about news feeds. It's about then grasping with the content and making it editorially expressive, where image becomes really key, and you know that you're going to go back and look at something. In social media, time has shrunk. It's become instantaneous, and I talk about it moving from substance to instance. And something that you've seen a minute ago has gone. There's no archaeology anymore. It's the first time since probably 40,000 years prehistory that we're living in an age where we will not leave archaeology for future generations except shop signs and gravestones, because that's where our writing will continue to exist. I put that down to say 35 minutes. Thank you.
I'll give you 6.
Okay, thank you. You know, just the power of the image, the story here. This is about gangs in Liverpool, and it's a tragic story about shootings and parents losing their children to this. Oh, shut up. Parents losing their children to this incredibly tragic outcome of modern government policy and ideology. So here, the image, oh, you can't really see it very well. But here the image is all you need, really. And then conversely, you have Mark Smith. And you can use words and play with scale and create narratives just simply by the combination of everything. I'm doing another talk, aren't I? Mad Culture. If you haven't got tickets to the Mad Culture Day next Thursday, it'll be really worth it. There's some great magazine designers talking on that one. I'm going to whiz through a couple of other things. Components, system components, which I've talked about earlier, and then something that I'm not going to criticize because it's being published later. We've talked about this. But coming back down to motifs that are so culturally absorbed and understood, is part of our whole DNA as a culture, anywhere you go in the world. And the challenge with all of this is anywhere you go in the world, it looks the same now, increasingly. You can go to McDonald's in Beijing or Brazil or London, and you know it's going to be the same. It's generic, it's entropy. It's where complexity becomes simplified and reductive, and you end up with what you call condensation symbols. And a condensation symbol is where a complex idea has been reduced to a single phrase or some letters. MAGA, Make America Great Again, or Black Lives Matter, or Brexit, or Just Do It. These are condensation symbols. But in this process of reductionism and oversimplification, there's no more nuance. And you end up with wars happening more easily because it becomes diametric, it becomes me versus you, black versus white, poor versus rich. And then you have a very fragile planet. So it's an appeal really today for more complexity and fluidity. But anyway, we did this. It's in the canteen in the headquarters, which my mum is really proud of. And we did the typeface, their first ever owned typeface apart from the script. And I'm only showing you this because we had to create something that was modern, something that would work on every single platform, from print to digital to social to environmental. And we spent 3 days in their archive. And they had thousands of pieces, and we didn't want to leave. It was just unbelievable. And isolating different characteristics from Coca-Cola communication over the years allowed us to build a collection of instances that we then pulled in to our final typeface. So building them in to give a flavor. You know, what is a Coca-Cola font? It's almost impossible until you create it and then you say, this is the Coca-Cola font. I'm going to stop here, except maybe that. Because then it sort of becomes invisible again. And then you see it, and then it becomes so familiar that it also becomes invisible. Okay, I'm done.